Hello, here's this week's piece. So it is a very damaged old dresser. The top has that huge scrape in it, so I'm not going to be keeping the top wood even though it has a gorgeous grain. It went well through the veneer. There's some friends hiding inside, some wasp nests. Those are the worst. I can't handle it. So it's just very dirty. It's missing most of its veneer. We're gonna turn this around right after we get rid of these, and they're long dead and dried out. But I mean, does anyone else just get the super heebie-jeebies from these things? Yeah, it's so terrible. That was the heebie-jeebie dance, in case you were wondering. So I'm going to remove the hardware and then give it a good vacuum because it was really, really dusty inside. This had been left outside. I don't know for how long. It had just a lot of gross built up gunk all over it. And then I'm going to be using a putty knife and a heat gun to remove the leftover veneer. There's only one drawer, you can see it to the left, that still had quite a bit of veneer left on it, which is actually a good thing for me because I save large pieces of veneer for other projects if I ever have to fix anything. But these smaller ones came off really easy with just the heat gun and the putty knife. And then there is veneer on these drawers for a reason. So I'm going to go through and fill in any gaps in the wood. There is a little bit of damage from where the hardware was put on it, so I'm filling in around those. And I'm just using one of the hardware screws to stick up through the other side to make sure that the hole is clear for when I reattach the hardware. And just get kind of anything that needs to be filled on there filled. And then while that's sitting and drying, I can start removing the larger piece of veneer. So you're just working in small sections as you go. If you're trying to save the whole piece, you're going to do a longer process with damp towels and all that stuff. But I don't need to save this entire piece. It was already damaged. I'm just going to save the larger chunks that I can use later. And then I'm going to go through and give everything a good sand so I have a nice surface to work with. I was initially going to try and keep this top drawer. It looked to be in okay shape to be left wood, but then I decided against it later on. So this one got more sanding than anything else. The rest of the piece is just getting a scuff sand all over. And there were some lifting pieces of veneer on the side. There was some water damage at some point, so what I'm going to do is just use my putty knife and a little bit of hide glue and shove it up underneath all of the lifted pieces of veneer, just to make sure that I'm getting all the glue up inside there. You can use a glue syringe as well, just anything that will get the glue up in there. I'm using hide glue because it's a very thin glue and it tacks up really, really fast, so it's really good for these types of applications. And then I will clamp these down with a few boards and clamps and let those dry out. Now, since these drawer fronts were veneered, sometimes you'll get lucky when you take the veneer off and you've got still great wood underneath. That wasn't the case with this, so what I'm going to do is take my Anaglypta wallpaper, and that just is a textured paintable wallpaper. And I'm going to apply this with my satin poly. You can apply this with wallpaper paste as well, kind of whatever you feel comfortable applying it with. Wallpaper paste I think might be easier for somebody who is just starting out because it's a little bit thicker, and I think it's just a little bit easier to work with. But I'm comfortable using my poly for this type of paper, and it works really well for me. So just initially, I'm kind of putting down a tack layer of the poly, getting it on there, and then making sure it goes over all three drawers because I'm leaving the top drawer blank, so it's just going over the three bottom drawers. And I'll work one drawer at a time, making sure that they're all lined up evenly so that in the end the pattern matches and lines up when we put the drawers in. And again, this is just kind of a tack coat with the satin poly. I will go back over again with another coat when I'm finished on the underside after I get these down and get them split apart with a razor blade. And as you can see, this paper is really thick, so you can work over it with your hands, relift it, put it back down. It's very, very easy to do. And then I'm just taking my razor blade and running it between the drawers to give me a clean-ish edge. I'm going to go back and clean these up a little bit later, but that's how I make sure the paper lines up when you put the drawers in. I put them all on in one piece and then split them apart, and then I can go back with my poly again and make sure that I have enough in there to make sure this paper stays down and it won't lift later on. Now, since the drawers are wider than my paper, I'm obviously going to have a seam. It's pretty minimal. You can barely see it in the finished product, so long as you do get your patterns lined up as perfectly as possible. So this is exactly the same process. I just cut out a sheet that would cover all 3 drawers, and then the main thing here is just lining up the patterns from one drawer to the next. That's it. Super easy. And like I said, this paper is really forgiving in that you can lift it up and re-put it down if you have to. Then I'm just taking my blade again and I'm cleaning up all the edges. I want to make sure that this is as flush as possible. You can even curve your blade just a little bit at about a 45 to make sure that it is an even cleaner surface and there's less of a chance of the edges catching on anything and lifting later on. I'm going to remove this applique. There was a whole bunch of dirt around it and it had a few breaks in it, so I'm very carefully using my putty knife, just sliding it underneath there and working it around all the edges to remove it. It was a very weird substance, kind of plastery. It actually looked like a wood carving, which is typically what they are, but in this case it was more like plaster that had yellowed over time. So I'm just going to clean up the front little skirt area where the applique was, scrape off any extra dirt, any old glue that was there, and then fill in all the damaged parts where it was missing veneer with just some wood filler. Now back to the applique. I'm going to give it a good clean. This is just my Chalk Mountain cleaner, and I'm making sure that all of the dirt is off and that I have good clean surfaces to glue it back together, because there were already breaks in it and they were separated, so there's quite a bit of dust and gunk in each of the breaks as well. I want to make sure that I have all of the pieces that I can get it put back together, and then I just use a little bit of tape to start with to kind of hold them in their places. And I'm going to be using hide glue again, just because, like I said, it's very quick drying, so it helps a lot when I'm trying to do small pieces like this that I want to stay together. And I don't want to clamp this with clamps because it might, again, snap the plaster. So I'm going to be using tape to get this on there. Since I had planned on leaving the 2 front legs natural wood, I'm just going to be using some stripper. This is just a 15-minute clean strip. I'm just placing it on there and I'll let it sit for it's a lot of time. And then we'll move on to the top little decorative backboard. There was one small piece of veneer missing. I just decided to make a clean edge cut with that with a chisel, And then I can use actually one of the other pieces of veneer from the top drawer to fill that in. So all I'm doing is making sure that the grain is running the right way and it's a color that fits in. The actual top piece has quite a few different colors of wood in the back. You can see it's kind of stripy. So that part almost didn't matter so much, and I'm just going to be using a bit of glue and making sure the edges line up on the inside edge and the bottom edge. I'm gluing it down. Usually when I have a lot of glue squeeze out and I'm using clamps, I will use a piece of wax paper in between, but you can use kind of any plasticky type of material if you have it lying around. I just always have this wax paper. I get it from the dollar store, so I'm not worried about spending too much money on it. So anyways, clamp that down and I let it dry. Like I said, this hide glue dries really, really fast. And then I just take a razor blade and I'm cutting around the edge, and that totally fixes that piece of veneer that had chipped off. Now, this was a complete waste of time because I ended up not liking the way that it looked put back up on the dresser when I was finished. But now you get to see how to do that repair. Now back to the legs, I am removing the stripper and then I'm going to be using mineral spirits to deactivate it and get it all cleaned up. And I'm using a very, very fine steel wool pad to do that with. Next, I'm going to prime the piece with my gray 123 primer. It's the primer I always use. It's always linked below, but it's good stuff. And it's water-based. I always apply it with a foam roller. Sometimes I'll use a chip brush if I have to get into finer details. But those are really the only two things that I use to apply this. It's just really easy to work with, and it's not super stinky. And then once that's dry, we can start painting. And this is going to be kind of a modeled ragging technique. There's a lot of blending. There's just all kinds of stuff going on with this piece. So I'm starting out with my blackboard. It's a really deep dark black. That's going to be at the bottom, and we're going to fade up into a light gray, but it's not going to be what the overall piece ends up looking like. This is just kind of your base, and I'm laying it down, just making sure I have color everywhere. And then of course, as you know, if you're blending upwards, you want to go a little bit higher with your color than you plan on stopping, because you'll use that to blend into your next color. As you're going over this paper, you can kind of see it's a little more difficult. You can't just throw some paint down. You kind of got to scrub it in a little bit. But if you're blending, it just kind of helps with the process, so it works out well. So this is my dark gray. It's called Iron Gate, and it's going to be blending into the black. You can see the drawer is shoved in further than it should be. We're going to fix this later. So it's just missing the drawer stops on the back side of the drawer, but that's super easy to fix, so we'll do it a bit later. And then as I'm working, I will pull my drawers out and make sure I hit the edges of them so that everything kind of matches as it goes. And then we're going to move into steel, which is the lightest gray I'm using, and it has more of a blue tone to it. So this is also your first coat. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just in this look in general, it never has to be perfect, because we're going to do a ragging technique over the top. We're going to do a wash and everything like that. So it helps everything look just a little more lived in, and it's kind of a grungy look. So I kind of like the mix of the pretty wallpaper, and we're going to have some gold gilding and all that stuff kind of mixed with this really grungy vibe. It just offsets it. And then we're also going to do, because this dresser is going to be very cool toned, we're going to do the gold stripes to kind of warm it up, and everything is kind of just opposite all at once. So this isn't a look for everyone, but it's certainly one that I just love. This is a fun little thing that I've never actually shown before, but it's really fun when you open the drawers and see it, when you don't do a stencil or anything like that, but it's just following the dovetails, and it just looks really nice when you open the drawers. So these ones aren't going to be getting stencils or anything on the sides, even though I typically like to do those, but since there's so much stuff going on with this dresser, I felt it was best to kind of leave them a little plain. Now, the top drawer is the only one dovetailed in the front. The other ones have more of a mortise and tenon type situation going on. Now for round 2, this is the second coat, and the second coat is really important on this kind of wallpaper because as everything dries, you'll kind of see places where you've missed and there's white peeking through. So you just want to take extra care in doing the second coat on this, making sure that you get everything that you could have potentially missed because it's so textured, just some of the paint doesn't fall down there or you didn't swirl enough or any of that. So you're just making sure that you get all of that on the second coat. And it's the exact same process as the first, but like I said, even on this one, it doesn't matter terribly how perfect you do this because we are going to be doing a couple other things over the top of this as well. But it's a lot of swirling up and down, back and forth, all that. And here's the fun part. So we're going to add a few extra colors in this. So I've got a really dark teal and a deep purple, and then some of my brown. It's called Woodland Harbor, and it has almost a purpley undertone to it. So I'm literally just taking a round blending brush and I'm swirling these all into the bottom blend. And you can't specifically see each of these as they go, but you just kind of get a hint of all these different colors in this, but they're all muted and together, and it just looks so lovely at the end. And this is super easy to do. And you want to pick tones that kind of go together, and then as I go up the pieces it gets lighter, then I'm not going to be using the darker colors. I'll use similar colors and a lighter shade to do the exact same thing. And you just blend them out until you can't see the edges of anything. This is super easy, and it just adds just a little something different. So again, we're going to be working up in the blend and doing the same thing as on the first coat. Just making sure we swirl everything in, get it all together, work in the second color, keep it going up to the top. This is just a 3-color blend over the entire dresser, with the lightest part being the vast majority of the piece. And then we're going to add in those extra color spots, and as I said, they'll get lighter as we go up. So super simple. You're just going to keep doing the same process. I'm going to speed through this part because you watched it a little slower on the bottom section, but it's just easy peasy. Now I'm going to be using my slow drying oil stain. This is the white, and I'm going over the legs. I was going to do the back. I did the backboard with this as well, but like I said, I decided to go without it. So again, it was an extra step I did that doesn't matter, but the legs look awesome. So there, that it kind of gives a very vintage, whitewashed, just all the amazing stuff this white oil stain does. Now we're going to take an actual whitewash and go over this entire piece. You want to work in small sections, and I don't do washes over my paint unless it is dried overnight. I want to make sure that I'm not going to lift off any of my previous paint. And so I'm brushing it on, and then I take a rag and I am blotting it back because I want to leave that texture in it to give it kind of that grunginess and aged look. It's a very old world feeling. So you're just going on, and if there's any extra, you can kind of swipe it, but then after you swipe, you want to go back and do dabbing motions. And in your dabbing motions, you can move your rag around, and you want to move your wrists back and forth and make sure that you're changing the pattern of it. Otherwise, it'll be a repetitive pattern, and you don't want that. You want it to look very random. So this part's a little more difficult over the textured wallpaper, but you can still totally do it. You do kind of have to work the whitewash in. And I know that my raised parts of the wallpaper are going to get a separate treatment, so it's okay if it has a little extra whitewash on it now, because I will fix it a bit later. Once I do that to the entire piece, I'm going to throw a few stripes on my top drawer. This is with gold gilding wax. This is the Rub and Buff in Antique Gold, and I just use my tape stripes. I'm not the biggest fan of tape, but until I can actually do this perfect, I'm gonna have to use it. So I did this for the top drawer, just for the stripes. And then for everything else, I'm going to be using just a paintbrush and the poly mixed with my glazing dust to make the gold for the rest of it. So I just mixed up some gold to match this gold, and then I will use my poly and glazing dust mixture to do all of the other gold detailing stripes, because I like to freehand all of this stuff. And then with the same solution of poly and glazing dust, I'm going to take a large flat brush and I'm going to very, very gently, I'm not using the tips of the bristles, I'm using more of the, holding it more sideways and brushing it across all of the details in the wallpaper. And as you can see, it really starts making that pattern pop out, and it is all just a gorgeous gold masterpiece. And so I'm doing that over all 3 of the drawers with the wallpaper on them. Then to seal the body of the dresser, the lower part, I'm going to use black wax, and that's to darken everything up after the whitewash at the bottom. And then I will use clear wax from the top down and then mix them together once they meet. So this just kind of adds more of a grunge at the bottom, seals it up really nice. The very top of the dresser, I do still seal in poly because people set things on top of their dressers and I want to make sure that's extra protected. But after I do the poly on top, I will then go over it with wax as well. So there you can see I have the clear wax, and I'm using the same brush so that it helps it blend together. And then once you get this on, you really can work it into the wallpaper and everything else. And then you'll let it absorb into the paint, make sure it's all sealed, and then you'll go back with a rag and just wipe it back. So the poly I'm using on top, I took my leftover gold that I had that I was doing the details in. I added just a smidge of this steel paint color into the poly and added extra poly. So it's going to leave kind of a golden shimmer to it and also add a little bit more of the steel color, and I'll do several coats of this. Now to fix the drawers that need drawer stops in them, I'm just cutting up a little scrap piece of wood. You just need to make sure the wood is high enough to hit the lip of the drawer. And so I'm cutting these down to size. I will typically do about 1.5 inches long. And then I get 2 matching pieces. And I'm just going to use my chisel, snap it in half, and then I've got 2 blocks to do the drawers with. So my top drawer and my bottom drawer both needed this. So I'm just going to show you the top drawer, but it was the exact same process for the bottom as well. So the top one still had one of the old metal ones, which actually tear up the bottom of your drawers. So it's actually really good to change them out if you have those still, if they're running along the bottom of your drawers. But so I'm just setting them down, using my nailer, and tacking them in. Now, as you can see, my drawer doesn't go back anymore. It's lovely. And again, I did the exact same thing for the bottom. Oh hi, Taryn here, and we've got another finished product. So this is a really sweet little dresser. It is done in kind of a grungy fade. It's one of my most favorite finishes just because it's something without being too crazy. So it's not a huge print, or it's not these fit into a lot of people's homes, the style of them, while also kind of being fancy at the same time. So it's a really fun finish. I highly recommend trying it out. It's really, really easy, and I think it's so pretty. Okay, real quick, I'm at 4,100, and you guys are just incredible and amazing, and thank you for all the copies. You guys are just so, so kind to me. I can't say thank you enough. Let's get you some photos.